Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you guys coming by for the stream today. I've got a really interesting. Oh, and my stream did not get muted. Okay, there we go. All right, guys. Thanks again for joining us today. I've got a really interesting guest on the stream to talk to. I don't know about you guys, but like many people, I did not really know that much about South Africa. I'd heard the stories about, kind of the apartheid and Nelson Mandela, the things that we get in the media, the things we get in movies, but I didn't really know anything about current events there. I had some friends who were South African in college, but they just didn't talk a lot about home back then. And, kind of as I've been doing this online thing, as I've been on Twitter and I've been talking to different people around the world, you just get connected to a lot more people in that way from across the world. I've started learning more and more about what's going on there. And so I wanted to bring a guest on today who had a lot of knowledge. Now, Conscious Caracal, he has his own YouTube channel, which you guys should definitely check out. I've been watching some of his videos to get a better understanding of the situation in his country. He has a lot of good deep dives on kind of the culture and the background and everything going on there. So I just want to go ahead and introduce Ernst here. Thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me on, Oren. For me, the big thing is maybe just a little bit of an introduction in regards to who I am. So I'm ninth generation South African. My family's been here since 1688, so longer than your country has been a country. And yeah, I'm still being called an immigrant or a tourist in my own country of birth. So that's a daily reality. But then also I work for the civil rights organization AfriForum, which is a civil rights organization that specifically focuses on minority rights. Now, the interesting thing is when Americans think about minority rights, they think about, a black minority. But in South Africa, you have a very large range of different minorities. You've got cultural minorities, linguistic minorities, and racial minorities. So AfriForum specifically focuses on the rights of those minorities, but then also has a very strong focus on the Afrikaner minority, because that is the vast majority of our membership, which currently stands at 260,000, which makes us the largest civil rights organization on the African continent.
Now, I'm interested, when did your YouTube channel come from your involvement with that organization, or did you get started on YouTube before that? How did that work? How did you enter into kind of the online sphere?
No, actually, my YouTube channel and my Twitter contributed to me getting the job. So for me, it was I was just very angry one day, and I made a YouTube channel and a Twitter account just to rant because I didn't see my views represented out there. And I thought, well, I might as well put them out there, then stop being lazy. And then I started growing a following, and I started creating more content. And I mean, I always joke with people that from the start, my plan was to start like a YouTube channel that I constantly upload on. I would have chosen a much easier name to pronounce and spell than the one that I did. So it was unplanned, it was completely organic, and then I started working for AfriForum. So I started this YouTube channel back in 2016 and just sporadically uploaded since then, and then started uploading more frequently as I started growing an audience. And then in 2019, I started working for AfriForum in the campaigns department. So I'm in charge of strategy and content. And the content part relates to my YouTube channel and also to my opinion pieces and reports that I write.
Well, that's great. I mean, we so often, put a lot of effort into talking online, but it's great to see that actually translate into real world action and real world activism. So I'm glad to know that eventually got you pushed into making a difference in your own country. Now, I think, like I said, for most people, and guys, I know we've got some people joining. I just wanted to let you know that the channel did kind of go over 1,000 people, and so super chats are now an option. So if you do want to, put $1 in the tip jar, you can put something in the super chats, and we'll make sure to talk about it a little bit later. But back to South Africa, I wanted to get a general idea. I think, like I said, so many people, including myself, we're just unfamiliar with the basic history of South Africa. Could you just explain just a brief overview where the country came from, how it was founded, how it came to be made up of the different peoples it's made up of, and kind of that situation there?
So South Africa has a very interesting history, seeing as it is just this pretty much congregation of different peoples from all across the world. A lot of rejects from all across the world came here as well, not the cream of the crop in any respect. So, for example, in regards to my own history, the Afrikaners' history, that started off as a trading post in 1652 in the Cape. And the only natives here at the time that they encountered were the Khoisan, which was a very small nomadic tribe here in South Africa without like cities or farms or anything. I think their technology would be on par with Stone Age technology. And yeah, so that's where the white settlers or the white settlement started. The black inhabitants of South Africa, it's very much disputed in regards to when they came here, but they didn't sprout from the ground as many would like you to believe. They did migrate here from Central Africa. I'm not exactly sure exactly when, because like I said, there's a lot of debate going around between it. It's within the range within the last 2,000 years up to only maybe less than 1,000 years. So there's a very big debate going on there. I'm not an expert in the topic, so I'm not going to just speculate and choose the speculation that suits me or makes me feel the most comfortable or whatever. So unfortunately, I can't give all the clarity there. But when the first white settlers came here in 1652, they didn't encounter any black South Africans, because as you can see, if you pull up a map of South Africa, you can Google black South Africans population map. You'll see that they're very much concentrated in the north of the country, because that's where there's rain, that's where there's a lot of fertile soil, that's pretty much where as they migrated down, settled. But in the Western Cape, where Cape Town now is, where the first trading post was established, there were absolutely no black people there, only the Khoisan, that nomadic tribe that I mentioned. So that's one of the big misconceptions that a lot of foreigners have when it comes to South Africa, is that they think it was like America, for example, where the European settlers arrived and there was just natives spread out everywhere. The conception of South Africa is that the Europeans came here and it was just exploding with black inhabitants here, which is not the case. They were the first time white settlers encountered black Africans in the South African area it was somewhere in the late 1700s. As the white settlers were moving more inward, they found at the Fish River. Now I can't remember exactly, but that's hundreds of kilometers away from Cape Town. But yeah, the black South Africans were pretty much concentrated where the rainfall was best and where the soil was the best. And the Western Cape is largely arid, and they didn't migrate that far. And the vast majority of the South Africa's surface is actually it's not possible to farm there without a borehole technology, which none of the inhabitants here had at the time when the first settlers arrived. So there's no contestation about that. The entire area that is known as South Africa today was populated by black South Africans. That's not possible, because the vast majority of it cannot be. You can't live there without a borehole or any type of that similar type of technology. So that's the one thing. So now I can get into the part that I know better, and that's my own culture's history. So I'm an Afrikaner, but don't make the mistake as to think that all white South Africans are Afrikaners. It's far from it. It's like making the mistake that all black South Africans are Zulu. They are Zulus, they are Quotas, they are Tswanas, they are Chongas, they are Pedis, they are Sutus, they are Southern Sutus, they are Venda. I mean, I can go on and on. We have 11 official languages, so just to make the point. But on the white side of South Africa, there's also a lot of, not diversity, but there's a very clear divide. So you've got the English-speaking white South Africans, that are the descendants of the English settlers, and then you have the Afrikaans or Afrikaner white South Africans, or Boers, who are the descendants of the Germanic countries like France, Germany, Netherlands, and a little bit from some of the other countries there, but those are the three main influences. So firstly, the first of my ancestors that came here were the Dutch. I'm personally English. My ancestors are English, Dutch, French, and German. So the first of all my ancestors who came here were the Dutch, who came here in 1652. Then, not long after, and you can go read up the history, it's very fascinating. The French Huguenots were religiously persecuted in France, so a lot of them fled to South Africa in the late 1600s, and they also came here to just be free, to practice their religious freedom. So there's a very large influence in the Afrikaner culture as well that come from French descent. And then there's also a lot of German settlers that came a little bit later, I think in the 1800s, or maybe a bit earlier. And then also just through time, there were also little small groups of Europeans from all other different countries that also came here for work or for any type of reason. So we're a mixed bunch. So when I was on the Plebs channel, one of the comments was, stop talking nonsense, you're just a different variant of Dutch. And I'm like, well, that's patently not the case. We're a mixture of a lot of cultures. The Dutch actually fading a little bit as a lot of French and a lot of German came in. And we're not even Dutch speakers anymore. I speak Afrikaans, which is a mix of different languages with its root in Dutch. But I can read Dutch, but I can't speak it or write it. So yeah, that's the short history at the beginning in terms of where the ancestry comes from. So don't make the misconception that all black South Africans are one culture or all white South Africans are one culture. It's simply not the case. If you look at South Africa, well, we can get into that a bit later. But yeah, so just to wrap up the history. So then in 1899, the second Anglo-Boer War happened. When the Boers, first in 1838, the Boers, when the English colonized the Cape, the Boers trekked away. Star Trek, well, that comes from the Afrikaans word trek, meaning to move into the interior or on a journey. So the Boers, my ancestors, trekked into the interior to get away from the British, to be able to speak their language and not be governed by the empire. And as they moved into the interior, there was actually a genocide of conquest that happened under the black cultures at that time, called the Mfekane. So when the Boer settlers were moving into the interior, they were just finding skeletons and the remnants of cultures there that were just absolutely wiped out. I actually have books on it here. So of course Shaka Zulu, and then of course Dingaan killed Shaka, and then also Mzilikazi, the Black Napoleon. So there was all these wars going on in the interior. So when the Boers got there, they just found empty land with a lot of skeletons and not knowing what's going on. So very, very terrifying. And then also, and there were a lot of alliances between the Boers and the other black tribes, and there were also a lot of conflict. But it's not a one-sided story. It's not like it was just white against black. There were certain tribes that were allied with the Boers against their opponents. There were others that attacked the Boers. So it's a very complex history. And then after the Great Trek, the Boers settled in the Transvaal and the Free State, and they found gold. And this caught the attention of the Queen. And just as the Boers tried to get away from the Empire seemed to find them again. And then the Second Anglo-Boer War broke out, in which the British were prepared to fight for 3 months, and it ended up being 3 years. Because the Boers knew the terrain. Trench warfare was actually invented in the Boer War by the Boers. And concentration camps as well to a certain extent, because that's how the Boer War ended, when under Kitchener, the British enacted a scorched earth policy because the Boers were hiding in the mountains and getting resupplied by the farms. So the British burned down all the farms and put all the women and children in concentration camps, where more women and children died in those concentration camps than soldiers combined on both sides. So in the end, I mean, if you take, the Boers were fighting for their freedom and for their families. So if you take away their families and have them die in concentration camps, there's not a lot left to fight for. So that's the end of the Boer War. The Boers surrendered, and then in 1910, the Union of South Africa was established, in which all the different cultures were pretty much locked into this new economic bloc called South Africa. And then in 1948, the National Party won. You get the institution of Apartheid, which lasted until 1994, with the goal of separate development. And there's a lot of intricacies and complicated politics there as well. I'm not too well versed on that history. I know the basics of it, but I'm not going to be able to give you an expert analysis. You actually should go watch Mr. Robert Dygan's channel for that. And then also 1994, apartheid comes to an end. New South Africa happens, and I'm born in the new South Africa as a born free.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of great information. And yeah, anybody who hasn't checked out Robert's channel should also do that, because there's a really high quality historical videos there too, along with your channel. But I think it's interesting. I don't think a lot of Americans would have realized the amount of complexity of the settlement of the country and all the groups involved. And of course, ours is different, but it does echo a lot of kind of the propositional nation, coming together out of a disparate number of settlement groups, both from the native angle and from Europeans who are settling there. America has always had that identity, of course, of Irish and Italian and Anglo-Saxon, and it's always had that mix along with Native and Hispanic and other groups. And so I think that's something that a lot of Americans will recognize as something that they can see in their own nation and they can identify with. And I don't know that they would have known before that. But yeah, so now approaching more contemporary history. What is leading up to our current situation we're looking at in South Africa? I know you say you're not quite as versed with some of that history, but just give a basic outline. I think Americans know that at some point, 80s hair metal bands couldn't play in South Africa because apartheid was bad, and then it wasn't there anymore at the end. Like, I think that's pretty much the American understanding of South African history of the last 30 years or so. Could you shed a little more light on that for people?
In regards to the post 1948 history.
Yes.
All right. So in 1948, the National Party came into power, which was the party that ruled throughout apartheid. And then in 1961, South Africa exited the Commonwealth, declared themselves independent of the Commonwealth, and became a republic. So in 1961, you could say was the peak of apartheid, peak apartheid reached, if you will. So then the plan, and I'm putting this in very simple terms, like I said, because it would take up the entire stream if I had to go through the whole thing. But the basic idea, from how I understand it, was, and they called it separate development. So it was giving every culture their own space where they could develop and have their own leaders. But this was pretty much forced separation. So it's not a free market system. A lot of people misconstrue apartheid South Africa as this capitalist society fighting the communists. No, it was actually a very heavily state-centralized society with a lot of censorship going on, a lot of authoritarian policies used as well, a lot of music and film banned. I think one of the things that was banned was the song "Another Brick in the Wall" was banned, I remember. And yeah, so you had this system of forced separation, and now, as I have, and I'll get to that now. So, and then as the international community started sanctioning and boycotting South Africa, and also they lost their allies when the Cold War was starting to wind down, the regime fell in actually in 1994 was the first democratic election, but apartheid was ended a lot longer before that. In 1991, I think, I'm talking under correction, it was already established that apartheid would be starting to be phased out. And then in 1994, we had our democratic election, and then we start with the forced integration dispensation. So the apartheid regime was forced separation through state coercion, and the new regime under the ANC is forced integration, which is, in my mind, equally as evil.
Yeah, we'll get to our current situation in just a moment, but I'm interested to ask you. I get the impression that some of that was driven internally, but some of that was also driven externally by UN and government pressure, Western pressure outside towards kind of the attitudes that had been taken in South Africa. How much of that do you think was internal, and how much of that do you think was influence from international actors who wanted to see some of those changes made inside the country?
In regards to the fall of apartheid in the end, how much of that was from external pressure?
Yeah.
Well, as I know from what I know of history, I think it was a balance between the two. I mean, there was a lot of interference from a lot of international actors. Now, a lot of people always just think of the Russians and of the communists, but there was a lot of pressure and interference from the Americans and the English as well, or from Britain, at least the UK. But internally things were also not right as rain. Internally, there were also, political parties were being banned. Pressure was building up. There was a lot of unrest. South Africa was fighting a war on its border. It was a very turbulent time. So it was this perfect storm of international and internal pressure. A lot of the internal pressure, either organic or internationally backed. In the end, it's what happened was a mutually assured or a stalemate was reached, because when the Berlin Wall fell in 1991, the ANC's funding dried up. So then the Soviets didn't back them anymore. So they were in a very weak position, and the economy was really in a bad position. So the National Party was also in a weak position, which means both sides pretty much compromised out of weakness. But now in the modern South Africa, what you see is that a lot of people don't understand that. People think that no, it was an absolute victory by the ANC, so they can do whatever they want and they need to go hard on. It's like, no, they were in a very bad situation as well. It was pretty much just a stalemate. So, but that's also a very complicated issue that you'd have to devote an entire episode towards. A lot of excellent documentaries on the subject.
Oh, I'm sure, and yeah, the reason I asked was, again, we get so little interaction with what happened in South Africa here in America, but it seemed like from what I saw, when I was young, a lot of that seemed to be coming. At least the like you said, America was definitely involved in pressuring there, and I feel like a large amount of that was guilt on Americans' part. We of course had Jim Crow segregation in America, and I feel like a lot of people in the West, and especially America, felt like this was their opportunity to stand up in a situation they didn't stand up before. Of course, it's not their country, so it's not really, it in no way makes up for any of the things they wanted to make up for. But I do feel like there was a spirit of, we got past this, and we're going to virtue signal and show how much we hate it now by pushing another country to take the same path, even though of course the realities in South Africa were very different. I feel like they projected a lot of that onto the country at the time.
So rather than me giving more just of my own not very detailed knowledge in regards to that time, I would suggest people go watch the documentary on YouTube called Tainted Heroes. It's a documentary about the ANC during apartheid and the fall of apartheid. It's going to give you an incredibly in-depth view of what happened, and with a lot of footage, interviews. It'll open your eyes in regards to what's called the People's War. So when the ANC pretty much adopted the strategy of bringing the country to its knees and making it, in their own words, ungovernable.
Well, then everybody can check that out. And let's move forward now to something that you are very familiar with because you're actively involved, obviously, with some organizations and such. Let's talk about the current situation in South Africa. I really had heard, again, not much. I think I saw when Lauren Southern did that documentary on kind of the farmer situation in South Africa. I saw some rumblings about that, but that was really all I knew. And so for people who are unfamiliar with kind of the current political and cultural situation in South Africa, where is that at right now?
Well, the thing is, like I said, we're currently living under the forced integration dispensation. And the ANC started off pretty brightly in regards to their economic growth and being the darling of the world, and they could do no wrong at the beginning. Then under Mandela, then the second president, Thabo Mbeki, things started to deteriorate. There were a bunch of dodgy deals. Corruption started creeping in. BEE started creeping in, which is Black Economic Empowerment, which is pretty much just another brand of what you would call affirmative action. It's quotas for businesses. If they want any kind of government assistance, they need to have a certain percentage of Black Africans in their higher up positions and also employed. So that's when that started creeping. We also got sport quotas during, and this is early 2000s. Sport quotas started creeping in, which also is still around to this day, where a certain amount of our national team in every sport needs to have a certain amount of Black and a certain amount of Black African, as they call it, and then also person of color, which would include colored and Indian people. So just maybe a disclaimer, colored person in South Africa is actually an ethnic group. They're the descendants of the Khoisan, that nomadic tribe that I mentioned earlier, but also intermixed with mixed race people and with Malays and also Indian and Muslim. So they are, in the local slang, you'd call them brown people, not Black people. They are the coloreds. They are the community that's separate from Black South Africans, and therefore in our affirmative action law they are also classified as a different group. So you have Black African and then you have person of color that includes them. So yeah, then that's that early 2000s phase, and then Thabo Mbeki was replaced by Jacob Zuma in 2008 and also 2007, I can't remember, but anyway, under him things started deteriorating rapidly. Increased state spending and welfare spending went astronomically through the roof. We started experiencing load shedding, which is just a very nice word for rolling blackouts. I saw California started getting rolling blackouts or load shedding this year, which I found very funny. And we still have it today. We had a lot of rolling blackouts earlier this year. It's died down a little bit now because winter is at its end, so we're not getting as much. There's not as much electricity being used, but rolling blackouts are still a thing. 10 years after the problem started, and now we are living under President Cyril Ramaphosa, who replaced Jacob Zuma 2 years ago, and he was supposed to be this big reformer. He was supposed to be the great uniter, but his rhetoric has actually villainized and attacked and scapegoated minorities more than the previous president. He has done nothing about corruption. Rolling blackouts are still happening. So we're pretty in dire straits in regards to the ANC's recovery that was being expected. They talked about the new dawn, that under President Cyril Ramaphosa, there would be a new dawn. But this night is just going on and on with no new dawn in sight. And yeah, in that time as well, culturally, a lot of targeting of the Afrikaner culture, Afrikaans universities being turned English in very nefarious ways, Afrikaans schools being targeted and turned English. It's the Anglo-sization of the country and standardization of the country in a way that only a globalist would like to see. And it's not just happening to it. Afrikaners are one of the main targets of it, but it's happening to the other black cultures as well. They're discouraged to enjoy their culture or to celebrate their culture. They are pushed towards standardization, where everyone has the same culture, same views, same religion, same language, and are global citizens. That's where we're being pushed, and that's why I'm doing my culture series on my channel, where I don't just talk to white cultures, I talk to black cultures as well, to give them an outlet and a platform where they can actually talk about their culture, because they're discouraged in every other sphere of society. So there's also a source of a lot of friction, is the fact that there's active measures specifically in terms of my culture to erase it and to pretty much remove all our heroes and our monuments from public life. I mean, the whole statues thing that's happening in America started in South Africa. Did you know that? It started with Rhodes Must Fall in 2017, or was it just 2016 or 17? Where there was a statue at the University of Cape Town of Cecil John Rhodes, and there was this big online movement, #Rhodes Must Fall, and they eventually removed the statue, and then Rhodes Must Fall jumped to Oxford in England, and then it started being popularized in terms of removing statues. That meme was kind of popularized in England, and then it jumped over to the US, and suddenly you guys are removing statues as well, so you can thank South Africa for that little meme.
Yeah, I don't think any part of that won't seem like it has some pretty significant parallels for people who are listening in the U.S. Obviously, we have much softer quota systems in the United States. The civil rights legislation has obviously required certain hiring practices and training practices and firing practices. But the fact that South Africa instituted hard numbers and percentages is something that obviously we haven't gotten there quite yet in some ways, but probably will. I don't think anyone.
There have been cases where teams were disallowed. They were competing in like a international tournament, and they had to withdraw because one of the black players had been injured, and they won't be able to field a perfectly proportioned team in regards to the racial makeup, and therefore they had to forfeit according to the quota rules that we have. So it's very strict.
Yeah, and I also like how you talked about how the attempt of homogenizing the cultures is not monoracial. It is across multiple racial and ethnic groups in the country, because I think everyone who's being honest is, of course, seeing that the idea of diversity being pushed is clearly performative and generally seems to be one that is promoting control, and is never about actually maintaining a culture. It's about kind of McDonaldizing the culture, turning it into,
like I said, standardizing everything.
Exactly. And so I think people are very, very familiar with that narrative of globalization and homogenization, and the diversity quota simply being something tacked onto the end to produce compliance, rather than something that actually protects and defends all these different cultures, which deserve to have their own history and their own cultural setup protected. So I guess I definitely want to get in more to the connections between the situation in South Africa and what's developing in the United States, because I think there are a lot, but I also don't want to turn this just into the, tell me more about what you think about my country episode. So before we get to what we can learn from your experience, I'm interested to find out more about what you think is happening in your country. Do you think that there are promising political solutions? Are you seeing messages getting out? Are you seeing bridges being built? Do you see any alliances between different groups inside the country that look like they could forge ahead and create headway inside the country? I'm interested to hear what could be the future and what could be the possible solutions that you see inside the country.
Yeah, so maybe just one more policy that also really much was popularized here, and it's starting to take over there overseas as well, is the renaming of streets, buildings, and towns. You haven't had towns renamed. We have towns and cities renamed. Don't worry, it'll get there. Just be patient. So for me, the things in terms of solutions, I'm part of it. I'm part of a movement that's already thinking of solutions. So I'm I work for AfriForum, but AfriForum is part of the Solidarity movement. So the Solidarity movement is pretty much an Afrikaner-centric movement that is aimed at ensuring the Afrikaner's cultural survival, but also state-proofing our communities and helping other communities preserve their cultures and state-proofing their communities as well. Because I subscribe to the same philosophy as one of our great philosophers, M.P. van Wyk Louw, who said that if you only care about the survival of your own culture, but when other cultures are being threatened by this globalization, standardization, and you just give them a cold shoulder, you're being a hypocrite. Because any culture that dies out is one less instrument in the orchestra of God. So for me, there's a united effort, or increasingly united effort, to help people preserve their cultures. But I'm at the forefront of cultural preservation for the Afrikaner. And with state proofing, what I mean by that is pretty much establishing neighborhood watches, making sure people can get their firearm licenses, establishing alternate energy supply networks, support networks, everything that the state provides, we're trying to provide. For example, when they shut down the Afrikaans public universities, we build our own, which we already have. We have already established a university called Academia, and we are currently building a university called Soltech, which is a technical college. And it's not like it's just online and everything. No, we're building an actual brick and mortar university campus, and we're not building it with billionaires backing. The Solidarity movement has over 500,000 members, I think, if I checked last time I checked, and they use the funds of people donating. Well, I want to say in rands, but I need to convert it to dollars for you to understand. So people donating $1, $2, $3 a month, and the accumulated donations has enabled that organization to build a literal university campus out of nothing. So that's the mission, is to stop relying on the state and pretty much creating your own solutions, rolling up your own sleeves, doing it yourself. Another solution where I'm not directly involved is the town called Urania. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an Afrikaner-only town in the Free State. It has a population of about 1,800 members, and they live there on private property where they administer the town themselves. They are trying to create the entire town to run off their own energy. And it's pretty much just a cultural town where they take their dignity, their destiny into their own hands, which I think is a great initiative. So it's not, the solutions are not going to be political in terms of, we just need to vote the right party into power and then everything will be fine. We are pretty much taking the approach of accepting oblivion in regards to accepting that the increasing state deterioration is inevitable. And the only best way then is to start building our life rafts and to make sure that our community is safe and is able to function when the inevitable state collapse happens. But it's not going to happen all at once, as a lot of foreigners would think. It's been happening since at least 2 decades ago, where the state is just increasingly falling apart and deteriorating. So it's like watching an explosion in slow motion, or a car crash in very, very slow motion. So that's our philosophy is not one of we're going to save the system, but rather we're going to accept the inevitable and prepare accordingly. So that's the solution that I'm involved with.
So that's excellent, because I really want to talk about that. That's huge. So I talk with a lot of people online. I'm in a sphere. I don't know how familiar you are with it, the neo-reactionary sphere. And a lot of times we are looking at the option of parallelism, which I think is exactly what you're describing here, where because political action does not seem available due to the way the system is set up, it doesn't seem likely that political solutions will be allowed. Building parallel institutions, building those educational institutions you're talking about, building those communities that are interdependent and are not as reliant on the state, is something that we've definitely discussed. We have not put it into practice the way that you're talking about. I think that some of the difficulties we face is that our government obviously is a world-spanning empire. And so I don't know that it would allow that level of parallelism inside the country, maybe the way that has been allowed inside your country currently. But I think looking at what you're doing is really important for the community of people I talk to, because that sounds exactly like what we have talked about getting into and getting involved in. And so I think if people are interested, and I'm constantly hearing from people, okay, we know the cathedral makes it difficult for Americans to have a political solution. What other options are there, really? What else can we actually do? I think looking to what you're talking about in South Africa and looking to what you guys might be doing there, even if we can't one-to-one that, it is an interesting thing and a good case study for people who are looking for solutions. They can actually take a look at that and understand where you guys are going and the gains that you've made, because I think that sounds like a solution a lot of people I've talked to have been looking for, and they've been looking for models to follow that would actually practically work. And so I think that what you're talking about there is great, and I encourage people. Do you have any information on that on your channel? Have you made any videos on that?
No, but you can go check out the AfriForum channel. But unfortunately, I think most of those videos are Afrikaans. But you can go, if you go to the AfriForum website, that is in English. So or you can go to the Solidarity website as well, which is in English. But AfriForum's website will be giving you more than enough of information on that. So here's the thing. I just saw in the comments out of the corner of my eye, someone said, so you're just repeating apartheid. No, we're going in a completely different direction. The previous dispensation was forced integration, a forced separation by the power of the state. So the state pretty much separated everyone using the state's mechanisms to keep everyone separate. The current dispensation is forced integration, where the state uses its mechanisms to integrate everyone and standardize everyone. Our solution is willing self-determination, where you take your own destiny and your community's safety and your community's preservation into your own hands, but you're not using the power of the state or the mechanisms of the state to do it. Because the fundamental flaw with using the mechanisms of the state to achieve that is when someone else takes over that state, you're pretty much left high and dry, and you are in a very precarious situation. So it's never sustainable. You have to do this yourself, and that's more difficult because you actually have to go roll up your own sleeves and not beg the state, but you have to pretty much take back responsibilities from the state that the state conveniently does for you, and nobody instinctively wants to do that. You just want to load as many responsibilities as possible onto the state, and the state gladly takes them. But as we learned in South Africa, that's not sustainable either. So we are pretty much living in the neoliberal diversity experiment with a strong state as well, because the strong state needs to do the strong state is necessary to protect the individual in this type of situation, because the neoliberals in South Africa at least see the state as the great equalizer. So you've got all these different factions, different cultures, different religions, all competing, and there's conflict and friction. So the only way to solve it is to pretty much standardize everyone into small atomistic individuals and let the state handle the rest. So the state will be the equalizer, and that's the country that we live in today. So for me, and then that state just has to continuously increase its scope because the country is so complex. So in the end, our solution is pretty much to find a solution outside the state. We're not trying to retake the state. We're not trying to get our guys in charge. That's not going to happen, and also it doesn't work. Don't think that just because you can get your guys in charge of the state apparatus, everything's going to be fine and dandy again. It's just a matter of time before they're either captured or replaced by another nefarious or malicious force, and then you're in exactly that same position. I mean, Flip Base, the head of the Solidarity movement, makes a very astute observation where he says the Afrikaners were in charge of the state apparatus in South Africa for the majority of the 19th century. or almost the majority, and that made us pretty much dependent on the state, and it made us believe that the state can solve all our problems. And one of the positives to come out of the end of apartheid for the Afrikaner was the fact that now we are forced again to do things ourselves and not rely on the state. So there is a little bit of a blessing in disguise there, according to him. And I do believe it. I think rolling up your sleeves and doing it yourself is the only way that you can really take ownership of your institutions, of your community. But it's hard. It's difficult. It's much easier to just think, oh, the state's already there. It's got a police force. It's got everything you need. It's got pretty much everything you need to keep your community safe. We just need to get our guys in charge, and then everything will be fine. That's not going to work. The story of South Africa should tell you that that's not going to work. You need solutions outside of the state. You can't just be obsessed constantly with this battle to retake the mechanisms of the problem itself.
Yeah, and I can't help but hear so many echoes of what I've been talking about and the problems that we face in America. It's hard to sit here and listen and not hear so much of what we're looking at right now. I so much of our problem in the United States is that the last few generations, especially our baby boomer generation, they relied so heavily on cultural momentum coming out of the early 1900s. And did not realize that just winning elections more often was not going to protect their culture and keep their values in place. And so I think they let the cultural institutions lapse. I think they let the neoliberal forces, like you're talking about, take over those institutions, and they kept electing Ronald Reagan's and didn't realize that was not going to actually safeguard what they wanted to safeguard. And now I think they're getting a rude awakening with someone like Trump in office. And not that Donald Trump isn't trying in many areas and is better than many other Republican candidates, of course, has been, but he simply is not able to affect the changes and make the long-term changes that he needs to, and does not have the control over the government he needs to actually keep those, to battle back against those forces. And I think what you're talking about is just reinstituting organic communities. You're talking about having real traditional communities of people who share a culture, share language, share heritage, share value structure, working together. And that doesn't mean, and like you said, that doesn't mean that anybody needs to get involved with the state. It means people making decisions for themselves instead of having them pushed down on top. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, is that, and it took Afrikaners so long to realize it, but we're slowly realizing that is the thing. Because if you don't do it that way, you're just going to be fighting for control of the Leviathan, and then you're going to get back control, maybe, and you're going to have a few decades of prosperity, win back some ground, and then you're going to lose it again, and you're just going to be left high and dry once again. So it's a futile endeavor to try and just be fighting over. It feels like there's this giant, and you're just these, like in the story of Gulliver's Travels, and you're all these little people, and you're fighting over control to get favor with the giant. But the giant doesn't give a damn about your culture or your civilization. He just serves whoever gives him food. So for me, it's not the solution, and for the solidarity movement neither. For us, it's we're creating organic communities that pretty much whatever happens around them, they are safe bubbles where your culture will be, as MP van Wyk Low said, we have a responsibility to safely carry our culture and values through the crowd. So I really like that imagery where you're just walking through the sea of people and they're all angry, and it's really not a pleasant situation, and you're carrying this very delicate piece of glass. You just have to get it to the other side. And but that's your mission, and you can't now and then some fucking bouncer or some big guy comes up to you and says, well, I'll carry it for you, just have to pay me like $1,000. You're like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I'm getting tired of carrying this and worrying about this little artifact. So you hand it over to the bouncer, but then one of your enemies just says to the bouncer or this big guy, I'll give you $2,000 if you let me smash it. And he's like, yeah, sure. And he hands it over, and the guy throws it on the ground. And you just lost thousands of years of progress or hundreds of years of progress because you were too lazy to do it yourself.
Yeah, and I think often, for the Americans too, they've just found that even when they finally do, as you say, convince the giant to be on their side, it simply wasn't the thing that was causing the problem in the first place. For so many, they realized that the problem has grown far beyond what the government apparatus could even fix. And so I still think it is important to be involved. I still think it does matter who's in charge. I think it
Yeah,
matters
of
a
course. I'm
lot.
not an anarchist.
Sure, but I think we need to understand increasingly that that is a front on the battlefield, not the entire battle. So I think that that is important, both understanding what you're saying about your own country, and of course something we can learn here. Because the one thing I think I do want to go into also, and we'll go into it just a moment, but I want to let people know I'm going to probably ask Ernst here my last couple questions. If you want to ask either a question of him or me, you can go ahead. I think the super chats are working. You can jump in and do that if you want. Of course, please keep it channel appropriate. But we will make sure to get to those by the end if you want to throw $1 in the tip jar. But what I wanted to ask you, of course, is we are talking about parallelism, which I think is essential moving forward. I do think that is a really key thing that people need to understand. Rolling up your sleeves, getting there, doing the work, building the organic communities. But we also have to realize that our anarcho-tyranny is a thing that's impacting, I think, both of our countries, increasingly America, and something that I think has been involved in yours as well. The laws are simply not the same. The rules are simply not the same, and they are targeted at groups and will increasingly continue to do so. I know in America, of course, we've had these rolling riots for literally months on end, since the lockdown and the death of George Floyd. We're now in October, and we still have riots going on a weekly basis, and the media has just stopped reporting on them at this point. Like, they don't even bother reporting on them, and so people have just kind of assumed they've died down, but they haven't. I mean, they're not as intense as they were, but they're continuously happening. And we're also seeing people who are just not allowed to defend themselves. Famously, we had multiple people who were threatened by rioters and either attempted to defend themselves or did defend themselves and had charges brought, and they were held clearly and very illegally as political prisoners in those situations. And so I think this is where control of the state does matter, right? Because at the end of the day, it's hard to have this parallelism and these communities if we do have the state coming in and keeping people from protecting those communities in a legitimate and legal way. So I guess my question to you would be, what do you think? What do you think about that in general, both from maybe what you've seen in the U.S. and how that relates to South Africa?
Yeah. So I've got 2 points there. The first one is to any Americans listening or people in Western countries listening, don't make the mistake that it could never happen there. I see too much of that type of thinking. You're just a little bit down the road if you go down this road of electing socialist or Marxist kleptocrats. And I saw there in the chat, Sideline Opinions makes a point that I wanted to mention earlier, and that is that South Africa is ruled by what we call the tripartite alliance. So that's the ANC, which is the ruling party, the South African Communist Party, and COSATU. COSATU are the workers' unions. So we are pretty much ruled by an alliance of 3 parties: COSATU, South African Communist Party, and the ANC. So don't let anyone tell you, but the ANC aren't communist, they're not Marxist. They're friends with communists, and they have communists within the ANC. Our previous finance minister was a member of the South African Communist Party. So yeah, that's just a little thing I wanted to get out of the way. So in regards to what you're describing there, for me, the big thing is a lesson that you can learn from South Africa, and it's going to sound very strange to an American, but your constitution is not going to save you. South Africa has, according to the liberal elite, one of the best constitutions in the world. When our constitution was written in 1992, I think, it was lauded as the best written document after the Bible. And it was said that's going to keep everyone safe. And don't you worry, if you're a minority in South Africa, the Constitution will keep you safe. But as we've learned in the past 30 years, The Constitution can stand on its head and scream bloody murder in regards to what is right and what is wrong and what is against the Constitution or unconstitutional. Whoever interprets the Constitution is who holds power, not the Constitution itself. There can be anything in your Constitution, but that's not where the power is being held. The Constitution, as we've learned in South Africa, holds almost no power. The majority of the power, and almost the entire majority, well, the majority of the power is held by whoever is interpreting the Constitution, and that determines in the end what happens. So your Constitution can tell you the most beautiful liberal story, but if the Chief Justice doesn't believe in your story, he's just going to interpret the Constitution in another way. So the Constitution of South Africa is not Marxist. It is a classically liberal document with some deviations, but it's being interpreted in a very Marxist way. So I'm not too well read on the American Constitution and its guarantees and how your legal system works. But in South Africa, the Constitution didn't save us. The power in the Constitution is just a piece of paper. The power is in the hands of whoever is interpreting the Constitution. And if you go down the line and where you are heading from what I'm seeing, you're going to be appointing people somewhere in the future that interpret the Constitution radically different than you do now. And then the Constitution can say whatever it wants. So I think that's one of the reassurances that you need to maybe start having debates around, is where does constitutionality lie? There's an excellent book that I would recommend anyone to read. It's called There Is No Supreme Constitution by Professor Malan. So you can, if you Google There Is No Supreme Constitution and Malan, and his surname is Malan, read that book. It's exactly about this, the fallibility of this idea of the trust in constitutions. It is an amazing book. I actually have it here next to me. So yeah, that's one of the big takeaways from South Africa. And the other thing is what people also need to realize in regards to this is you can't withdraw from the information war that's going on around you. Don't just say, well, the mainstream media is so powerful, I can't really, my little post on social media is not going to make a difference. You need to start actively putting out information, because the mainstream media in South Africa are pretty much dying, and now they're leaving a information void, and that void needs to be filled by someone. And who better than a whole army of citizen journalists, and they don't even have to all agree. And that's why the alternative media in South Africa is starting to blossom so incredibly this year, especially during the lockdown, because there was just so many demonstrable lies in the mainstream media that South Africa, I almost feel like trust in South Africa of the mainstream media is less than in America at the moment. So start building those alternative media networks, start bolstering those, start supporting each other, start sharing that, because this is in the end also largely an information war. So make sure you get those things in place, because if your media is going to go the same path as ours, the collapse is going to be very quick and very sudden, and then you're going to want to fill that void, not be caught off guard.
Yeah, I think your second point there is great. I want to get to both because I think they're both really important. But I think that you and I were talking about backstage before we got started. You're saying that the South African alternative media is really starting to just emerge in a very similar way to what has happened in kind of the Western and predominantly American sphere in kind of YouTube and other alternative media sources. And I think you're absolutely right that that's going to be key. I think the media is a clear weakness for what we like to call the cathedral in neoliberal circles, the kind of the globalizing force that tends to influence these different nations. I think that one of the first institutions that is falling apart and really showing weakness is the media, which is why you see such a hunger for alternative media. And guys, let me tell you, I mean, I was a reporter, I was a journalist, but I do not have a degree in journalism. I'm not a J school graduate. I literally My local paper needed someone to cover a town hall meeting they didn't want to cover. The sports writer was covering their town hall meetings, and they didn't want to do it. And so I sat around and listened to zoning decisions for like 5 hours and wrote about it, which is wildly boring, but roll up your sleeves, do the work. Like, you don't have to be a professional, you don't have to have degrees, you don't have to, especially I think in the new environment, people are so tired of the overpolished, overproduced voices. They want to hear real, honest, on the ground, experienced opinions and reporting. And so if you are the kind of person who has an interesting thing to say and an interesting way to say it, you don't need professional training. If you've got a decent microphone and an internet connection, you're a journalist at this point. And so you can get involved in these kind of ways. And I think that's a great thing for anyone to get involved to. I also want to say, as you were pointing out with the constitutions, that's a really important point. It's something that I had to come to a really hard understanding of because I worked in politics for so long, because I taught politics, my degrees in politics. Looking at the American Constitution and realizing it was not what I had been taught, and that political power was not what I had expected, was really important. If you want to go for an older book, De Maistre, Joseph De Maistre does a great job of demolishing the idea of written political constitutions. If you want to do a deep dive on that, but I think you're right. I think Americans have to come to the realization that we're not going to see the Second Amendment and other amendments in our Constitution that have been so enshrined in kind of our mythos are not going to be there for us, especially with the amount of people who have alternative motivations who are in the government. I don't think that they're going to be upholding those rights, and so we need to prepare ourselves for that. That's something that we absolutely need to factor in, and I think that's a great lesson that you put out for people. So we're coming up on our hour, and I want to make sure that we can do some questions. I see we've already got one up there. But do you have anything else you want to leave the audience with before we transition to any questions? Anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to talk about?
Just to get back to something that I talked about in the beginning. When you want to analyze South Africa, don't make the mistake of analyzing it from a racial lens. If you look at South Africa and you think of it's just a nation of white and black, then it's not going to make sense to you. It's going to be this incredibly bizarre thing, as I've seen with a lot of foreigners that look at it and say they can't comprehend it. Look at it through a cultural lens. When you look at it through a cultural lens, you will understand a lot of things. Like, for example, firstly, how the ANC, the factions within the ANC elect their leaders based on their culture. You'll understand why some white groups don't see themselves as the same thing as other whites. You'll see why certain black groups are burning other black groups in the street. You'll see why certain of the black cultures don't allow their adherents to marry other black people from other cultures. So if you're looking at it from a racial lens, you're just going to see all these contradicting situations, and it's going to break your brain. You're going to be so frustrated, you're just going to give up and stop looking at South Africa because it doesn't make any sense. But as soon as you start looking at it through a cultural lens, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing my culture series, things will start making a lot of sense very quickly. Especially, for example, if you're interested in the minority politics of South Africa, for example, the Afrikaners and the white community. If you're looking at that through a racial lens, you're not going to understand why these Afrikaners a lot of Afrikaners hate the English so much. Or, for example, why you have one group that doesn't have any real name for themselves, the English-speaking South Africans, while you have another group that speaks a different language, has a completely different culture, and has a name for themselves, the Boers or the Afrikaners. So I think that's the key thing that I'd like to conclude on, is if you are interested in South Africa and you're keeping an eye on it, take culture into account. It plays an incredibly big role, not only in the present, but in the past as well. Because like I said earlier, our history is filled with alliances and conflicts across races, across cultures. It's a lot more complex than just white group, black group, and they're in like a chess match situation where they're fighting it. It's completely not the case. So that would be my advice to conclude on.
Absolutely. And guys, if you have been enjoying what you've heard from Ernst here, make sure that you are going to the description of the video. I've got his channel and his Twitter linked. Like I said, he's got excellent material. It's very interesting. You'll learn a lot. And so you should definitely go down. Make sure that you're subbing to him. Make sure that you're following him before the stream is over. Now, it looks like we do have a super chat here I wanted to get to. So Death by Cognitive Dissonance, who has been a big fan of the channel and very appreciative, for $5, he says, great talk, Ernst. How does geographic separation play a role, and what economic options are most lucrative or available to create independence? I think he might be talking there with the parallelism that we had discussed earlier. Could you maybe shed a little light on that?
Yeah, sure. So let's just take the Afrikaners to answer his geographic question. And this is stipulated in Flip Base's book. Unfortunately, Base's book is only written in Afrikaans. The book's called Die Pad na Selfbestuur, or The Road to Self-Governance. But I'm trying to I actually know him, and I'm pressuring him to translate it in English as well. But anyway, his big thing that he diagnoses the Afrikaner culture with as a problem is our demographic dispersion. So we're not concentrated in any part of the country heavily. We're dispersed all over the country in very small pockets. So what we're doing to solve that is what we call in the Solidarity Movement as the Anchor Towns Project. So we identified 30 towns and cities where Afrikaners are concentrated, and we are going to pump extra resources into our branches there to improve the infrastructure, safety networks, everything in those areas to incentivize Afrikaners to move to those areas and concentrating our people then in more identifiable spots, and then being able to better organize and state-proof from there. So in regards to the second question, in regards to lucrative, I'm going to answer it in a bit of a different way, in rather than how you asked it. Don't become dependent on corporate or billionaire money. That is the killer. If you start a movement, organization, whatever, don't become dependent on that one. I'm not saying this is going to happen to everyone, but if you're approached by some billionaire and says, well, I like what you're doing here, kid, I'm going to give you $1 billion. Don't do it, because then you're not going to have control over what you want to do. You're going to be pretty much in the hands of whoever your benefactor is. So rather do what the Solidarity Movement and what AfriForum does, and have a donation system with a membership system. So you have ordinary people give their $1, $5, $10. I'm just using numbers. I can't do the exchange rate in my head, because the exchange rate is so horrible at I think it's 18 rands for $1 or 16 rands for $1 at the moment, which is horrendous. So, but anyway, so you have a system where you have a donation or membership system where people give, almost like super chats, but a monthly donation of $5, $10, whatever, $15. And then you start accumulating people, and then you get to a point. I mean, AfriForum is operating within a minority of 2.7. The vast majority of our members are Afrikaners, and there's 2.7 million Afrikaners in South Africa and 4.5 million whites. And our main membership is under the Afrikaners. So we're majority operating within a 2.7 million window, and we've got a 260,000 membership total. So that's very impressive when you think about it. So if you're in America and you want to start a similar type of group, it's going to be a lot more easy. But maybe on the other side, not, because we are actually filling a very large void. So we've got a lot of justification and a lot of reason for people to support us. So that's the financial model that you need to go for. And a lot of organizations in South Africa that are similar to us are adopting the same type of model. Membership model, normal people funding you, not big funders or corporate funders. Normal people, and it's almost, I don't want to call it a democratic system, but as long as you keep to your people are giving you money because they like your principles that you need to be very clear on. This is what we stand for. This is what we do. We're not going to change this just as the wind blows. Then people support you for those principles, and they will keep supporting you as you stick to those principles. You can adapt them in little ways and tweak them along the way, but it's that principle of as long as we do what's right and we do what people need, then they will keep supporting us. And then you have a supportive, then you can pretty much say, well, we represent 260,000 people's voices. So when you go to the UN or any type of organization that you want to talk to, I'm just using that as an example, you can say, I'm here to talk as representative of 300,000 people, which we can prove on our records. So that's the type of financial model that I would recommend, and that's the one we are using, because it gives you those two advantages. First advantage, you're not being dictated what to do by the whims of your billionaire or corporate backer. And secondly, every member that is donating to you also gives you legitimacy, because you can say, I represent the voices of X amount of people.
Well, that's great. Yeah, that's a great answer. And like I said, I did not expect to hear so many interesting solutions. Like I was definitely interested in hearing the situation, but I've been pretty excited to hear about all the different solutions you guys are putting into practice, because like I said, I think I have so many people who listen to my channel and channels like mine, and they're looking for exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. So I think they'll be pretty encouraged to hear what you've been talking about and some of the things that they can consider and possibly take action on their own. And so once again, guys, I want to say make sure that you go and check out Ernst's stuff. Like I said, I've got link for his channel and his Twitter. Make sure you're following him. Make sure you're subscribing to him. If you're new on this channel and you want to go ahead and like and subscribe, I would certainly appreciate it. Before we go, I want to make sure to thank Kiwich and Narco Republican for supporting me on Subscribestar. If you want to do the same, there is a link down in the description. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by. We've had a lot of really interesting comments, a lot of people asking some interesting questions. And so I want to thank you guys for watching. And finally, of course, I want to thank my guest, Ernst. It's been really great talking to you, man. I really appreciate you stopping by the channel.
No, thank you very much for inviting me on. And also shilling my channel there. It's always appreciated. But yeah, thank you very much. I'll gladly speak to you again in the future. Maybe we can, if we ever chat again, we can talk about a bit more in regards to some of the books that I recommended. We can get into the content of that as well.
Definitely, absolutely. A deep dive would definitely be more interesting on some of those topics as well. All right, guys. Well, thanks again once more for stopping by. We really appreciate it. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.